In this lesson, we're going to take a look at the Reflect Sample Compositing node. Alright, so if you've been using any of the Mental Images base shaders, such as the Phong or the Ward shaders, you'll notice that whenever we try to render these, that we are not able to receive things like reflection or refraction, even though those types of attributes are present on the Maya versions of the same Phong or Blend shaders. So what we can do to introduce things like the reflection or refraction onto these Mental Images base shaders is to use the sample compositing nodes as a way of introducing that. So let's go over to the Hypershade, and in our case we already have the base shader, our Mental Images Phong shader. So to use the sample compositing nodes for this, all we need to do is take this base shader, take a look at the output connections so that we can expose this shading group node. Alright, so what we'll do is take this Phong and its shading group node, and to bridge this connection, we'll use one of the sample compositing nodes. So these can be found over the Create Mental Ray Nodes list, all the way down toward the bottom at Sample Compositing. We'll scroll down, and for this lesson we'll use the Reflect Sample Compositing node. Alright, so really the use for this is fairly simple. All we have to do is take this compositing node, take our Phong shader, or whichever shader we happen to be using. Any of the Mental Ray base shaders will work for this. Just take it, middle click, and drag it into the input slot of this Reflect node. And now we take this Reflect node, go over to the shading group, expand the Mental Ray section, and now middle click, drag our Reflect node into the Material Shader slot. So essentially we've now used this as a bridge to connect our Phong shader to its shading group. And now, by looping this through, we can introduce reflection. So let's just take a quick look at what we have right now. And you'll see now with very little effort, we have the same exact Phong shader, but now we have reflections that have been overlaid on top of that. Now, one thing that is important to keep in mind is the fact that if you're using any kind of lights that are going to be casting shadows, if you want the lights and the shadows to interact correctly with this refract, or rather the reflect compositing node, you do want to make sure that you're using a Mental Ray light that's been plugged into this. So if you want to learn more about how to use and connect these Mental Ray lights, you can refer to any of the lessons that deal with these Mental Ray light types. Otherwise, if we don't do that, we won't get the correct shadow interactions on these objects. Alright, so let's go back to the Hypershade. Take a look at this Reflect node. Really, there's only a couple of very simple attributes to this. The Reflect color slider just controls the amount of reflection that's going to be present. So with a very low reflection amount, all set almost to black, or all the way to black, we won't receive any kind of reflections whatsoever. Which is exactly what we have now. We pretty much are left with the standard Phong material. Likewise, if we were to increase the reflection all the way to white, we've now pretty much eliminated all of the diffuse contribution that comes from the Phong shader that's plugged in here. And now we're pretty much using a mirror reflection type material. And again, that's exactly what we have in the render. And then just below that, we have the ability to disable the ray tracing contribution for this. And so when this checkbox is enabled, what this will do is, instead of using any kind of reflection rays to derive its color, it'll just simply look at the environment color that we have set up. And that's the environment color that's actually set up in the camera whenever you select your perspective camera. And if you were to take a look inside the Environment Color tab, this is what we're using to introduce a little bit of extra color into this scene, or a little bit of extra lighting whenever using Final Gather. So in our case, now with the Ray Trace checkbox disabled, we're now using just simply that color. So this is a way of really kind of taking some of your shaders, and if you're able to use things like reflections on just certain objects, this can be a way of really kind of making your scenes render a little bit more efficiently versus using things like the DGS material, which does require some kind of ray tracing algorithm or some kind of a ray tracing result to get reflections at any point in time. So this just gives us the ability to only calculate reflections on the very particular objects that we want. So that's a look at how we can use this Reflect Sample Compositing node.